Hey everybody, my name is Fred Warner and you're watching Future Engineering Bets. Today we're talking about the EV regs in particular relation to the UK marketplace. There's been a lot of push from the OEMs to say they're being punished and they're receiving punitive measures for the sales of EVs when they're not in any way in control of the consumer. So what the government is proposing to do is to reduce the 80% target by 2030 to more like 50 or to 70%. Now, we don't know what the number is. 70% wouldn't be a massive change. 50% would be a significant change. Many are calling them short-termist plans. The reality is if we achieved 80-90% reduction, people believe, and I would say so as well, in tailpipe emissions over a period of 10 to 15 years, that would be a huge and measurable turnaround. Is a zero emission tailpipes ever going to be achievable across all transport? That becomes one of the big questions that we all end up having to try and answer. No matter what you think of EVs, zero emission mandates, companies losing money is not a way to do business. Hey everybody, my name is Fred Warner and you're watching Future Engineering Bets, where we talk about the future product innovation, where people are going to be investing their capital, where the future market's going, and help you decide on what direction you need to take with your company, your shares, your investments. So today we're talking about the EV regs in particular relation to the UK marketplace. There's been a lot of push from the OEMs to say they're being punished and they're receiving punitive measures for the sales of EVs when they're not in any way in control of the consumer. So how is the landscape changing currently in the UK? Well, the government's been under a lot of pressure to realign with other parts of the world, such as the EU, on the 2030 mandate. Now, let's look at the 2030 mandate. The current 2030 mandate dictates that in 2030, 80% of cars sold must be electric vehicles. And they make that on a year-by-year change. So this year in 2026, that means the target is 33% of vehicles sold should be electric. And it's not. It's nearer 25 to 26% of vehicles sold being electric. Doesn't sound very much, does it? But OEMs have to pay £12,000 per non-compliant car sold under the regs. So if they can't get the mix right, which they aren't, they're paying £12,000 a car punitive measures. This is estimated to be impacting the industry by around £10 billion per year, which is huge. And it's not sustainable for OEMs to lose money. No matter what you think of EVs, zero emission mandates, companies losing money is not a way to do business. Now, if you go over to the EU, they've been making some structural changes recently, and they're already a little bit ahead in the UK in terms of their adapting and their mindset. Instead of in the UK where it's a percentage of vehicles sold, in the EU, it's a percentage reduction in CO2 across the fleets of sales that they make. Previously, the 15% reduction was on an annual basis. It's now been shifted to be able to spread over a 3-year basis, which is effectively deferring some of the regulations, not resolving them. However, they have made some small changes. They have a 2035 or had a 2035 policy that everything would be 100% EV, or more correctly, zero tailpipe emissions. The EU has changed that to 90% reduction in tailpipe emissions, allowing 10% to be made up of other things such as e-fuels, biofuels, and other mechanisms. So in effect, the EU is changing timelines and mechanics of how you calculate, whereas the UK is based very much on sales of cars. So we've got a situation, right? Demand for electric vehicles isn't as high as politicians require. Now, they have good intentions, but the reality is punishing the OEMs and fining them for what they sell, whilst cheap Chinese car competitors flood the market, is a real difficult place to be in as an OEM. Many are calling them short-termist plans. The reality is if we achieved 80-90% reduction, people believe, and I would say so as well, in tailpipe emissions over a period of 10 to 15 years, that would be a huge and measurable turnaround. Is a zero emission tailpipes ever going to be achievable across all transport? That becomes one of the big questions that we all end up having to try and answer. So what the government is proposing to do is to reduce the 80% target by 2030 to more like 50 or to 70%. Now, we don't know what the number is. 70% wouldn't be a massive change. 50% would be a significant change. Where the market push is going to is that it's not so much about maintaining petrol and diesel engines. It's about allowing hybrids to be part of the mix of the future for a number of reasons. One is that electric vehicles do not suit every single application. Some of those applications are transit vans, lorries, trucking, heavier vehicles. They don't really suit an EV application in terms of range. And let's not forget that EV vehicles are ballooning in weight, which is causing damage to the roads. The buses, the EV buses that go around the towns, they tear up the towns because they are incredibly heavy vehicles. EV cars, an average family car has gone from 1,600 kilos to 2,300, 2,400 kilos. It's like adding 8 people into a car for how heavy these cars have got in some cases. So what's really needed is for the government to see a shift that gives us the room to carry on with hybrids and allow a flexible fleet going forwards, whilst pushing for CO2 reductions rather than measuring it on a car-by-car basis and punishing if you haven't hit a particular target in a particular time period, which is based on consumer demand, not on what the manufacturer can force on people. Now, people can easily say, well, if you don't sell any alternatives, then that's great, but that equally could mean a total collapse of your business. Do we want our European automotive companies to collapse and we all just buy Chinese cars in the future? That's a question, but it's not one that most European automotive makers want. There's clearly a massive risk to jobs. The automotive sector employs a huge amount of people in the EU and the UK. Investment into those is significant, which drives even more jobs in other sectors. And industry viability is really critical to say, do we want to be totally reliant on continents outside of Europe to supply us all of our technology and equipment in the future? What's likely to happen? Well, we've got a political uncertainty in Britain at the moment. The revolving door of number 10 strikes again, and who knows what the next government, when it's formed, will do. But right now, you can expect that there should be some kind of relaxing of the rules, because otherwise they're just going to push the automotive OEMs into a place that they can't operate from. So let's watch out for that target being adjusted and seeing a mix of hybrid being allowed to continue further into the future. And the big question that the UK has not really picked up on yet is e-fuels, biofuels, sustainable fuels. Where does that sit in the mix? Because it might not have zero tailpipe emission, but if there's a net zero impact of the car, and when I say net zero, that means the carbon has been extracted from the atmosphere, it's been put into a fuel, it's then been re-put back into the atmosphere through running the engine, that's a net zero CO2. So we have different ways of looking at things in cars and in mandates that need to consider that overall strategic position in the UK and Europe. And I think UK and Europe shouldn't separate too much, because it doesn't really make sense for the UK to be on a path of its own. So let's see where it goes. Let's see whether that gets completed this year in adjusting those mandates, which gives the OEMs back some of the leeway they need in order to operate their companies and not be punished in billions of pounds worth of fines for doing nothing wrong other than the consumer deciding which car they want to buy. I'm Fred Warner. You've been watching Future Engineering Bets. I'll see you on the next episode.